Okay, so this is the part 3 of the session we are doing. Uh, Today's focus is on firing the engines and propelling the boat. So before we get into that, a quick recap again so that we don't lose the big picture. So basically we said you know the planet Earth is transitioning from dark age to light age because of, say, yuga cycles, or the everything is spinning in this universe, right? And everything is cyclical. So we can notice that there is kind of a upsurge happening in terms of, you can say, consciousness, awareness, or seeking for certain higher purpose. And we also notice there is a lot of turbulence in the world, which is, we see that it's actually on the surface, though there is a positive transformation taking place from the depth. And how to navigate through these apparently turbulent surfacial aspects. uh, so that's why we said move towards the eye of the storm rather than getting caught up in the periphery of the storm. And there are multiple paths to go there, so we are exploring that basically. And to do that, we said we need a map. Where are we now, and where is that end, or the north star, and which way to go, right? So we kind of looked at these zones: dark age, where we are looking at going more outward. We think that happiness is somewhere out in the world, and if I chase more of that, I'll get more happiness. That's the kind of a context. uh, Whereas the deeper Upanishadic wisdoms point to us that real happiness is within us already, and it's about going inward. And the people on this session, like us, are typically somewhere in this middle zone, where we are also in the engaged in the the physical world, outer world, and at the same time trying to explore the inner depths. So we go through struggles because we get confused whether it's going right or left, or which is correct. So the current state, which is kind of a, it's called relative reality. I am this body mind complex, and there is vast world out there, the dual or the Dvaita. That is the majority of the uh, you know perception we have. And Upanishads show that existence is just one consciousness. It's non-dual, Advaita. But to reach there, we need at least two-step approach. Otherwise, it's too far to stretch. So the step one is to recognize that I am beyond this body mind. It's still a dual, because then I am me, and then body mind and the world. So we actually look at this body mind also as part of the world actually. And there are some reference to explore this. And then we said navigating towards this, that right side, which is moving towards the eye of the storm, which essentially means that it's about stillness, quietness, tranquility of state of mind. Just like in a storm where that eye is very still and quiet, whereas there is tremendous turbulence on the periphery. So we use this metaphor of a boat going towards that, which is our Panchakosha as the vehicle. And three aspects: releasing the anchors, adjusting the sails and rudders, then firing the engines, is the way to propel this boat. Today we look at this Jnana engine, Bhakti engine, Kriya engine, Karma engine, about firing the engines. Next session we look at the adjusting the sails and rudders. And last session we looked at releasing the anchors. Hope some of you might have experimented. Hopefully, maybe we'll listen to if anybody has experiences towards the end. So today we'll look at this firing the engines. But before going to that, we should know what this engine is, what this vehicle is. I think that's very important. Where are its controls? Where are its steering wheel? Where are its indicators and dashboards to get visibility of what's happening? So it's important to understand that. So that's the focus for today. Understanding this vehicle and how to use those features of this vehicle. So we have been looking at this diagram, which is the
Vishu, can I ask
Panchakoshas.
a question?
Sure.
Dvaita, I understood body and mind, but Advaita meaning, what did you say? I did not get that.
Advaita means non-dual. That means there is no two, there is only one, which means there is only one consciousness. What
Okay,
we
thank
see
you.
as ourselves, the world, everything is just one consciousness. It appears as multiplicity. And we'll dwell into that in a greater detail in the next Sunday session, because that's the focus of that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And this whole engine or the vehicle and this journey is actually to go towards that, to realize that. So we have seen this, even Datta's session, he took us through these Panchakoshas from the outermost to the innermost. And then we, as consciousness or soul, whatever you can say, is actually beyond that. Again, in the next session, we'll dwell more on to see how can we say that, because this body, mind appears to be me. It is so tangible, and I feel hurt if something happens to the body, if there is a pain. So how can we say it's different than I? We'll go into that little later, next session. And also Upanishads show us that this is like a gross body, which is the physical body, and there are subtle bodies inside, and what are called causal bodies. And we use this vehicle to perceive and interact with the world through this vehicle. We also perceive, that means what's happening through our five senses. And we assume that whatever is perceived through five senses is reality. That's where the problem is. Again, in the next session, we'll see why that creates that virtual reality, essentially. And we also use this vehicle to interact and perform and act. So this is the vehicle, and we use this vehicle both for going inward as well as outward. So use the same vehicle to go outward, to do whatever we want to accomplish in this physical world, as well as go inward and to discover that, or to realize that we are not just finite body mind, but we are actually the infinity. And we also saw that we change the gross body during death, but the subtle body continues, right? That means it's like we change the dress. We discard this dress and wear another dress, somewhat like that. Again, then it may look like in a hypothesis. Again, we'll look at in a little detail in the next Sunday session. But today's session is to move towards that. How can we use more of these features and understand it? So let us kind of zoom into a few parts of that. So anatomy of our vehicle. This Annamaya Kosha, we understand this pretty well in the modern science, modern medicine. If you look at this, some of the aspects of this, like musculoskeletal system, we have this bones and muscles and all those kind of things. Then we know we have circulatory system, the heart and the blood vessels and all those things. Then we know we have respiratory system, we have nervous system. So all these kind of tissues and the whole physiology, all this is part of this Annamaya Kosha, which is physical body. Then the Pranamaya Kosha is 7 chakras along the spinal column, and there are what are called 3 central nadis, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna, and 72,000 nadis throughout our bodies. Nadis means actually they are hollow channels. They are like hollow pipes, you can say, through which the subtle energy flows. Challenge is in the modern science and modern medicine, we know up to this part, whereas this is not understood, not accepted. The pranamaya kosha, and that is a big gap actually. But this is a big strength in the, you can say, yogic sciences or Upanishads. Next layer, which is Manonmaya and Vijnanamaya. Broadly, you can look at this as in 4 parts: Manas, Buddhi, Ahankara, Chitta. In fact, Shankaracharya sang that Nirvana Shatakam, Mano, Buddhi, Ahankara, Chittani Naham. Right? So, Manas, Buddhi, Ahankara, Chitta. Manas is typically, you can say, what we call as mind, generates thoughts. Buddhi is, you can say, like intellect. They are not direct translations. Buddhi includes like Vivek. I can distinguish what is good and bad, what is right and wrong. I can discriminate. Ahankara is not the traditional pride, so to say, in the English word, or ego. It is the I-ness. That means I associate with this engine. I-ness, we can all feel that, right? I am conscious, I am seeing, I am hearing. That I part, that's called Ahankara. Chitta is called memory. So these are part of this Manonmaya Kosha and Vijnanamaya Kosha. Then Anandamaya Kosha is typically about 3 gunas: Sattvic, Rajas, Tamasic. Again, we might have heard about those, right? So now if you observe this, they relate to Panchabhutas. For example, musculoskeletal system is a solid, it's the earth element. Circulatory system is a fluid, it's like a water element. Circulatory system is like gas, it's the air element. Nervous system, which is actually electrical signals, it's like fire element. And then even more subtle than electrical signal is electromagnetic signal, what we know in science, right? So the Pranamaya Kosha carries something like that. It's called Akash, or space. In fact, space is not empty actually. Space is a field. This is another lack of understanding in the dark age, so to say, where we perceive whatever is physically perceivable by the 5 senses as the only truth, and electromagnetic energy is not perceivable, so we don't associate with that. For example, we dissect a body and we can see all these organs, so we say, yeah, they exist. And when you dissect these chakra nadis, they are actually empty spaces. You don't see anything. So the modern science and modern medicine says, there is nothing. But this nothing is the most significant thing in the Indian wisdom. Nothing holds everything. That's why Shunya, Ananta, has come from India. Zero and infinity. Zero holds infinity actually. This nothing, which is called this entire space, holds everything. In fact, modern astrology knows now that almost maybe about 4% of the space is physical in nature. That means so much, 96% is space, and space is not empty, it's a field. And there are many subtle energies there. We know about electromagnetic energy so far. And there are various spectrum, right? Even in the our light. So basically, we are going from gross to subtle in our science. Sthula to Sukshma. And this works from cause to effect. Sukshma is the cause, gross is the effect. Again, this is a very big thing to recognize from a modern science perspective. In modern science or even modern medicine, people are studying brain and they think brain is causing consciousness. The chemical and nervous activities in the brain are causing consciousness. Whereas yogic sciences and Upanishad sciences show that consciousness is actually creating or appearing as all this brain and body and everything else. That is the cause. This whole physical body which appears as manifests is actually an effect. And in fact, this entire vehicle we manufacture within ourselves. If you look at, when we are small baby, we are this big, right? Now we are all so big, and nothing is imported from outside, right? The leg or hand or came from somewhere. We didn't did an assembly from outside. Everything is manufactured inside. We just supply raw material here, rice, chapati, banana, whatever, and it gets converted to this phenomenal vehicle, right from this gross physical world to this subtle most aspects of this phenomenal, engine or a vehicle. So in the modern medicine, that's why it gets restricted to this Annamaya Kosha. They think it's a assembly of mechanical, chemical, electrical parts. That's why it's a reductionist. There are so many specialists, heart specialist doesn't know what happens if that medicine is given to kidney, for example. And kidneys where it actually clears all the toxins. That's why so many kidney failures happen because of medicine actually. So they are disconnect because they are not able to see the whole thing. Indian system is about integration. It's about seeing the whole thing and inclusive. So when you look at all the next firing those engines and yogic sciences, they're all focused on how to impact the subtle part. Because if you impact the subtle, the outer gets taken care. People think yoga means asanas. I'll show as you go along. Asanas is very small part of yoga, and even the purpose of asanas is actually move the energy body. It's not about a physical exercise. It is actually impacting the pranamaya kosha, because through that, whatever has to manufacture happens in a proper way then. So it's fixing the internal manufacturing process rather than importing a chemical from outside and substituting. It's very important to recognize this because in the modern medicine, of course, technology, diagnosis, they are all very useful, very good. But the whole concept of medicine is actually very wrong because they think adding chemical will cure things. And now modern medicine knows that 90% diseases are psychosomatic, caused by the mind, which is, Manonmaya Kosha here. Only 10% is pathogenic, caused by external bacteria, virus, etc. That too, it happens because we lose immunity, which is again because of mind. So the inner subtle is the most important mind. In fact, in nature, everything is like that. Gross is, subtle is more powerful than gross. You just look at a subtle temperature difference between ocean and land creates such huge storms. We won't even notice that temperature difference. So we need to pay attention to the subtle. So for example, this medicine, what happens is, it is similar to when you import something in a country from outside other countries. What happened to the local economy? They die down because local manufacturing dies down. Very similar thing happens when you import a lot of chemicals from outside. We actually kill our own internal chemical factories. Just to give some example, for acidity, people take antacids, right? What antacid does is it's an alkaline. It neutralizes the acid in the stomach. So it temporarily gives a relief. So people think, it's good, it's working well. But this is a control system. Stomach thinks my acids are getting neutralized. I should produce more acid. Actually, it starts producing more acid. And we need more doses, more frequent. It goes on like that. Then you have to really look at what's the root cause of acidity. It's actually the stress and too much worry. All those negative mental issues actually cause the mind and digestive system has a very, very big connection actually. Whole yogic science actually looks at those goes to the root of things rather than attacking at the periphery. And we also use the same vehicle to sense and respond. We have 5 sensory organs. We know that, right? Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the whole touch, all the skin. That is our way of sensing and perceiving this whole world, external world. And then we have 5 action organs, hand, leg, our vocal cord or the mouth, and excretory system and reproductive system. These are 5 outward action organs. So that is our sense and respond mechanism, and that's the same vehicle. So this is in a nutshell our vehicle. We need to understand this from a user perspective I'm describing, right? For example, if I have to use a mobile phone, I should know what are its features and how to access them, right? Whereas if I have to design it, develop it, manufacture it, it's a lot more complex. I need a different course. That is for siddhas and all those gurus who can actually tinker this and fix certain things. For us, it's good enough if you know the features and how to use it. This is another view of that. I won't go into that. This is a little bit more complex internal view of that, how all these things interact among themselves. This is from actually Adi Shankara's Viveka Chudamani, but this representation is done by a person called Chidambaram. He is part of Roots and Shoots core team actually. He used to be the head of Bosch Software Center in India and the Symphony services, etc. Right now, he's in his deep contemplations, so he's not participating right now. He's another phenomenal seeker and pursuit, actually. So he has very nicely put that whole thing, which is in Sanskrit, into this kind of a diagram, which looks like a computer architecture. So we'll look at some of that maybe at some time. Now, there is one more thing I want to talk about, the interconnectedness of all these systems, which you can understand in the more modern context, in the neuroscience context. So there are 7 chakras along the spinal column from Mooladhara, Swadhisthana, Manipura, Anahata, Vishuddhi, Ajna, Sahasrara. And it's so wonderfully designed. Along these 7 chakras, there are concentration of nerve tissues, what are called nerve plexus. And around that, there are 7 endocrine systems, which are our chemical factories. Now you can see how the subtle starts becoming gross. These nadis and chakras carry the subtle energy, you can say equivalent of, in the modern term, it's called bioelectromagnetic energy. And they influence the nervous system, which is electrical signals, and in turn influence the endocrine system, which is a chemical process. And endocrine glands actually then control entire metabolism of the body. That's how it works. So more we are able to address the root. That's why Kriya Yoga goes to the root of this chakras and nadis. And you moderate that energy, you can start driving the whole system in a proper way outward. So it's from electromagnetic to electrical to chemical to cellular. So you can see here physics, chemistry, biology, all integrate actually. And one more thing to notice is that this spinal column, which is a hollow pipe, ends in the center of the brain called hypothalamus. And people who have studied electronics communication probably will know that antennas are just hollow pipes, and they convert electrical signal to electromagnetic and vice versa. So these nadis, which are along this spinal column, they almost work like that. They're hollow pipes. They end in the center of the brain. In fact, it's a wireless connection to the brain. Whereas entire nervous system is a wired connection to the brain. You touch the tip of the toe, the signal goes to the brain. It's a wired connection. So chakras and nadis, you can kind of visualize it's a wireless connection to brain. So as the energy is moved up from Swadhisthana to Sahasrara, that's why it activates various nerve centers, which are along this central nervous system in the spinal column. as well as feeding different signal to the brain. So we tend to get a very different perspective of this existence. Now you imagine the entire electromagnetic waves is right now here. All the world's TV channels, radio channels, entire internet traffic, entire mobile conversations worldwide, everything is right now here, but it's not in our perception because our five sensors cannot detect them. Imagine if you are able to activate another sensor which actually feeds these signals to the brain. Imagine how the world will look. Simultaneously, we can see the entire universe actually. So again, in the next session, we'll dwell upon this, how these five sensors are actually deceiving us. They are giving a very different picture of the existence for us. That's called Maya. So this is kind of our vehicle, okay, just to understand the anatomy of that. Now we look at how to access the features of this vehicle. That's where Ashtanga Yoga comes in actually. This is the whole aspect of technique to access these features. So it starts with Yama Niyama. Yama are five social ethics, Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, which is about non-stealing, Brahmacharya, which is moderation. It's actually, these are not exact translations. In fact, Sanskrit, you can't translate it to English appropriately. English is inadequate to describe them. Aparigraha, you can say generosity. These are five social ethics. You can imagine Mahatma Gandhi just used this Ahimsa and Satya. He just lived that and demonstrated to the world and moved millions of people. Just the two elements of this entire Ashtanga Yoga. You can visualize the power of it if you really live it. Then niyamas, which are more personal practices. Saucha, which is purity, santosha, contentment, tapas, swadhyaya, self-study, Ishvara pranidhana, which is surrender, or it's also actually about constant remembrance of God. So it starts with this, then goes to asanas, which is actually postures to make the energy movement appropriate. They are not exercise actually. Then pranayama, which is using breath to control the prana or the energy. That's why it's called pranayama. It's not called swashayama. Even though it's breath, it's not called swashayama. It's actually pranayama. We are trying to control the prana through this breath. In fact, breath is one of the most powerful leverage into our vehicle. Then pratyahara is turning inward. This is, you can say, alternate food for the sensors, you can say pratyahara. So it's giving an alternate inner point of attraction. That means turning the senses inward. For example, as you start observing breath, we did that small exercise in the last session, right? In fact, you get into that, you will start enjoying that actually. And in fact, if you start observing the energy movement in the chakras and nadis, it's even more pleasant. So whole senses can actually start getting more inward and be, getting into that stillness rather than getting attracted and distracted outward. So pratyahara is something like that. Then dharana, concentration. By these practices, we can get our mind to become little more focused. Otherwise, it's too dispersed. It is so fickle. Every second it keeps jumping. What modern study shows, we get about 50,000 to 70,000 thoughts per day. You can imagine how dynamic it is. But how many of them are really useful? 99% of them are useless. They are the recycling of the same thoughts many times. So dharana means you start becoming focused. Then seventh is dhyana. People think dhyana means concentration. Dhyana means deconcentration actually. It is about letting go so that we relax and settle down. The mind settles down. Then final stage is samadhi, which is about we become that one. There is no dual. In fact, we can experience that. and it's very, very possible. So this is the 8 steps to access our vehicle. And if you look at Yama Niyama, it is about setting the direction and guardrails, because from pranayama, asana pranayama onwards, we actually generate a lot of energy. So it's like, if you have to fire a Deepavali rocket, you need to put the orientation right first, right? Otherwise, you put the fire, it will go to somebody neighbor's house actually. So before fire this whole vehicle, you actually orient it towards properly. That's why Yama Niyama. And it deals with Manonmaya, Vijnanamaya Kosha predominantly. Asana deals with Annamaya and Pranamaya Kosha predominantly. Pranayama deals with Pranamaya and Manonmaya Kosha. Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana deals with Manonmaya and Vijnanamaya Koshas. And Samadhi deals with Anandamaya Kosha. Now, if you look at this whole Ashtanga Yoga, the physical element, which is asanas, is very, very small part. Do you see that? Entire rest of the things are related to Pranamaya Kosha, Manonmaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, all the subtle parts. Again, in the dark age, we go by only what is perceivable through 5 senses and the physical elements. So asana becomes yoga. People think that asana means yoga. And that's how distortions happen. That's how all yoga studios has come up. They say steam yoga, rope yoga, hanging upside down on the rope and doing yoga. And they think twisting the body most is the most effective yoga. There are competitions. Whoever twists more is the winner. These are all aberrations, distortions actually. So if you don't understand, we'll wrongly use this vehicle. If you understand this, it's a phenomenal engine, phenomenal gadget, phenomenal vehicle, which is creating all other things we can imagine in our technologies, including complex aircrafts and spacecrafts to smartphones. Everything is done by this vehicle. Imagine the power of this. And it's all with us, but we don't know how to use it because there are no user manuals. We are not trained on that. So this is the science of yoga and Upanishads. So now I'm going into a little bit more technicality. This session is a little bit technical in nature. So now I'll run a little faster because these are a little bit more of a scientific, what should I say, validations from a modern neuroscience, those researches, so that it gives us a little bit more of a conviction. But one very big caution I want to mention is that we should not get lost in this research, because we need research and proof when we don't have a direct experience. For example, we don't need a research and a proof to show that sunlight is warm and bright, right? We have a direct experience. So research and proof is required when you don't have direct experience, but we should go for direct experience. There is no substitute for direct experience actually. Otherwise, we may get lost in this another, it becomes a substitute for this another running to the left in our map. Because it's again a dark age tendency, I just want to explore this physical dimension. So let me run through some of this. Let me start with Yogasana. Yogasana exercises different parts of the body very precisely. They are designed such a precision that they target very specific internal organs and the energy channels. They are so well designed by knowing the internals. That's why it has come from rishis, not from physicians or doctors who dissect the body and look at things, because it's a live process. They combine with breathing because breath is the very important leverage in all these things. That's why even in asanas, proper breathing is very, very important. Where to take, inhale, where to exhale, where to hold, all those things. They create flexibility and hollowness, lightness. This is very important compared to exercises which tries to build body and muscles. if you look at postures, they stretch and hold or compress and hold. That's how asanas are designed. You stretch and hold or compress and hold. That builds this flexibility and hollowness, which helps the flow of water, food, oxygen, electrical signals, everything in this body. So it is to clear the entire internal channels. And they are not exercises like aerobics, gym exercises, etc., which help to build muscles. In fact, these exercises reduce the flexibility and become blockers over a period of time. That's why one should be careful about those gym activities. They may look like fitness. Actually, they create blockers over a period because we develop a lot of muscles. This is one understanding on yogasana. On pranayama, pranayama does many things, right from physiological level to nervous system to chakras and nadis to mind. It is phenomenal. There are certain pranayama which increase the oxygen content in the lungs. For example, Ujjayi breath. It actually puts more pressure in the lung so that more oxygen goes inside through osmosis. There is another pranayama called Bhastrika, which actually pulls out carbon dioxide from the plasma of the blood. So it sucks and then exhales. In fact, we think excretory system is our cleaning mechanism or even sweating, but breath is the biggest cleaning mechanism in our system. 90% of toxins are expelled through breath. We breathe about 20,000 times per day. Imagine, it's a huge washing machine actually. We cycle the air through that. So if you are not breathing properly, these two could happen. We don't take enough oxygen inside or a lot of toxins get accumulated. This is at a physiological level. If you look at nervous system level, there are pranayamas. For example, Nadi Shuddhi pranayama, which is alternate nostril breathing. It actually balances the left brain and right brain, IQ and EQ, the intellectual intelligence and emotional intelligence. In fact, Google has created a program called Search Inside Yourself. Google has been searching outside. Now they're saying search inside yourself. It's a mindfulness-based program, which is actually meditation and pranayamas, but they use the term mindfulness, which has come from Buddhism, because if they say meditation, people think that it's not secular, it's religious, etc. Unfortunately. And they tied up with Stanford University to do the neuroscience research. So I'll show some of that, what the research is showing from a neuroscience. And pranayamas, actually, they drive the movement of prana to different parts of the body. And there are what are called 5 mahapranas, pancha mahapranas, which are kind of flows of energy through our body. Just like we have blood flowing and air flowing, we have prana flowing. And it actually controls this. So breath is one of the most important. That's why in every yogic aspect, they use the breath. It's that powerful. Now, meditation, some impact of that, the neuroscience research. This is from the Google Stanford research. Some of them I have showing that. One thing that's observed is that it reduces the brainwave frequency. In our normal wake cycle, our brainwave frequency is about 15 to 30 cycles per second. It's called beta state. And if you do just simple breath watch that we did last time, small meditation, it comes down to 7 to 15 cycles per second. It's called alpha state. If you go deeper meditation, delta state, 4 to 7 cycles per second, even more like that actually. It goes to reducing this brainwave frequency. So that's why it leads to deep relaxation. In fact, in sleep, we may think that we are relaxing, but in sleep, what's happening is input output is shut down, but the CPU memory and all is still active in our head. So that's why you get dreams, it plays back the data. So even in sleep, our brainwave frequency doesn't go sufficiently low unless it's a very deep sleep. That's why meditation is so relaxing. Even a 20-minute meditation actually can reduce 2 hours of sleep quota. I have seen that personally. And another thing they have studied is the neurotransmitters. These are like hormones. There are about 35 such hormones they have studied. I'm showing 4 of them: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, opiates. Dopamine is called antidepressant. People say stress and go to doctors. Actually, they give antidepressant. What the antidepressant does is it kills the ability of the brain to produce these waves. Very wrong way. We need those brain waves when required. That's why people who take antidepressant for longer time, they become very dull. But this dopamine we are manufacturing. What is required is we need to tune that manufacturing. And meditation does that. Oxytocin is called pleasantness hormone. That means if you produce more oxytocin, we will be happy unconditionally. Right now, we have made happiness conditional, right? If this happens, then I'll be happy. If this person reacts to me as I expected, then I'll be happy. So it's a if then else loop. So it's always a then mirage. No, we keep on chasing. Whereas if you produce this, you will be happy unconditionally. And when you are happy internally, whatever you do outside will be more effective, right? Our mind is more engaged. Serotonin is called self-esteem or confidence hormone. That means if you produce more serotonin, you will have less fear. Opiates is called painkiller. If you produce more opiates, we will feel less pain, not just the body pain, even the mental pain. For example, you have seen some people for the similar situation say, oh my God, big problem. Some people say, not an issue, we can deal with it. So if you produce more opiates, we won't say, oh my God, this is a big problem. We'll say, okay, we can deal with it. That means we reduce the mental pain aspect. So these are some of the things that happen. Another phenomenal thing, they observed what happens inside the brain. There is a part of the brain called amygdala, which is a small brain inside the center of the brain. It is called primitive brain or reptilian brain. Its function is for survival. And it triggers what's called fight or flight instinct. Subconsciously, for every situation, we'll be seeing whether I should run away from this or should I fight this. It was very essential when we are in jungles as an animal to protect from prey. But now in a social situation, we are much more in a protected way, but it's still active. So it sees threat even for small things. For example, if somebody criticizes us, we feel it as, is that a threat? And then it triggers fight or flight instinct. That causes stress. All these kind of things. Whereas there is another part of the brain called neocortex, which is the frontal part, which is responsible for higher thinking, higher awareness, higher consciousness. So what they have seen from my meditation is that it reduces the gray matter in the amygdala and increases the gray matter in neocortex. That means naturally we become a person of less reacting, more responding. Less stress oriented person, more calm person. Not telling to tell the mind be calm, be calm. We transform into that. So this is how we can actually change our pancha koshas actually, because we are producing that on a continuous basis. We are manufacturing internal cells all the time. So these are the way to tune our manufacturing process. So for this, I have given 2 books recommendation because on meditation, there are not good references. Whereas asanas and all, there are plenty available, or even pranayama, there are plenty available. Shriyam's on meditation is a very good starting point because it's designed in a Q&A format, question and answer. A lot of questions from a common perspective. Why should we do? What happens when we do? All those kind of things. Whereas this meditation by Osho is a phenomenal, deep insights about meditation and how mind works, etc. So I thought this could be useful reference. Then something on mudra, because in all these are combined when you do yoga, right? We use mudra and then do meditation or pranayama, etc. So what mudras does is like they're like energy circuits. 5 fingers have correspondence to 5 elements, panchabhutas. Thumb represents fire, pointing finger represents air, middle finger represents earth, ring finger represents space, little finger represents water. Easy to remember, water. And how it works is that if you use the thumb and keep it at the bottom of that finger, that element increases. For example, if you use the thumb near the bottom of the forefinger, air element increases. And if you use the thumb to touch the tip of that finger, that element balances. And if you use the thumb to fold that finger, that element reduces. And then there are combinations of this, so that you can actually change the combination of these panchabhutas in our system.
Can you just repeat once again, Vishu? Please.
If you touch the bottom, that element increases. If you touch the tip, that element balances. If you fold and hold, that element reduces. So you can do that experiment. If you have a gastric in the stomach not getting relieved, no, you just hold like this and sit for some time. Actually, gas will pass either up or down. Maybe neighbors will have problem. And for dehydration, for example, you hold the thumb finger at the bottom of this little finger. It increases water content. You will have less dehydration. So this is one aspect of the mudras. Another aspect of the mudras is it moves the energy body to different parts of the physical body. This is another phenomenal thing. For example, if you hold Chin Mudra, the energy body comes to the neck and above. Energy body will not be in the bottom. That's why this is used for meditation, so that it comes to the top of the head. And in fact, now we can measure these energy fields. There is something called Lekher antenna. I don't know whether Kaundinya is on the session. He is an expert on that.
Yes, Vishnu, I am here.
Okay, good. In fact, it's designed by a German by name Lekher. That's why that name. It's like an antenna. You can hold. There is a science behind that, and you can measure where our energy body is. In fact, our energy body can be outside of our physical body. So that's why there is a connection to Vastu and the interaction of spatial objects to earth and our body, all those kind of things. So mudras help to move the energy body. Again, very phenomenal things that happen through this. Another great technology is sound. I may be overloading a lot of information. Yeah.
When you say mudras helps to increase the energy, right? So is it that you're talking about
not increase the energy, move the
level,
energy.
move the energy up, right?
Yeah, different
so
parts of the body.
Yeah. So is it like is it related to Kundalini energy awakening,
Not
or
that.
how is it like?
Not that.
It's totally different, is it? Okay.
It's kind of related. It's all subtle energies. We don't know how many spectrum. I mean, at least I don't know. In fact, there are very large spectrum of energy. We know even just light itself is so much wide spectrum, right? And even in electromagnetic communication, we know such wide spectrum. But this is far, far, far bigger than that, going to the subtle realms.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So is Namaskara like a mudra? It's also a mudra, or how is it like when we
Namaskara,
put two hands together?
Yeah, in fact, again, there are a lot of things. In fact, in our palms, there are a lot of chakras. And in fact, we transmit from our palm. You can do that experiment. If you press the palm and then hold, you can actually feel the energy field. You can feel a magnetic pull and push. That's how, the blessing, even intuitively, we do a lot of things. We say bye like this. We don't say bye like this, right? So there is a lot of things on the palm. And Namaste is actually closing those circuits, and holding it at the Anahata chakra is actually about aligning some of those. So for every asana, every posture, there is corresponding all these connections of energy movement.
Thanks, Vishu.
Yeah. Sound is another phenomenal technology. We know sound music has great effect on mind, emotions, right? It's soothing or it's even exciting, the rock music or so many things. And sound and thought have great effect on water. This is another kind of research by a person called Dr. Masuro Emoto in Japan. He has done a lot of research on impact of sound on water. So basically what he does is this is kind of a pond water, and he does MRI on that, magnetic resonance imaging. So basically he freezes it and then does an MRI on those water crystals. And it looks like this, amorphous in the normal water. And the same water, he holds it in a cup and makes different sounds, mantras, or even thoughts, and then crystallizes them and does MRI. And he has shown that waters, they formulate very symmetric, vibrant crystals like this. So that is so much impact of sound and even thoughts on water. And now look at this, 70% of our body is water. So imagine the impact of sound and thought on our body at a physical level, at a physiology level. We also know how moon impacts water, right? The whole ocean, the high tide, low tide is because of moon being even 180,000 kilometers away. And that's why moon has such an impact on our water body also, because this is 70% water. That's why moon has an impact on our emotions and moods. That's why the word lunatic has come, actually, lunar, from lunar. So this is to understand how sound impacts at our physiology level. There is a lot more happens. It's Om is, for example, is a primordial sound. I won't do this activity. So for example, you sit yourself and do this experiment. You close your eyes and say ah continuously a couple of times and observe where you feel the vibration. Okay. Then similarly you do ooh and observe where you feel the vibration. And then you say and see where the vibration comes. You will notice that the vibration comes at these regions. Ah vibrates at the navel and below. Oo vibrates at chest and throat level. Vibrates at the head level. And put together is like Om. So this is head, heart, and gut. And this is how now modern leadership is looking at it. You know, the whole way of making choices, decisions. If you are making choices and decisions with head, heart, and gut, that will be a balanced choice. Earlier, people thought that intelligence is the most important thing. If people have a high IQ, they become very successful in life. That was the understanding. Then later, Daniel Goleman showed that emotional intelligence is even more important. Now people are saying intuitive intelligence is a lot more important and powerful. Shashikala, you shared today one small posting. This is about this intuitive intelligence. And now there are a lot of books. For example, this is from Harvard. Now they are saying there are multiple intelligences. But in Indian sciences, all these are actually already there. We need to just learn and adopt. In fact, this sound is actually used in all religions. There is slight changes. In some they say Amen, in some they say Amin, but it's all basic sound in all civilizations. Now look at how Sanskrit is designed from that. If you look at Sanskrit and Indian languages, the vowels from a, e, u, e, I, o, up to that. The is the beginning, u is the middle, and is the last part of these vowels. And this whole thing vibrates this entire chakras and nadis. And you do that without using tongue. You know, all these sounds you can produce without using tongue. And then consonants, ka, cha, ta, ta, pa. So if you look at ka, ka, ga, ga, nga, it starts at throat. Cha, cha, ja, ja, na comes little ahead. Ta, ta, da, da, na comes to the palate. Ta, ta, da, da, na comes to the teeth. Pa, pa, ba, ba, ma comes to the lips. It's like you make this basic sound and moderate, change the frequency like a flute. And this is the basic construct from which every other word and sound has been derived. In fact, Sanskrit is called discovered language. It's not a constructed language, because rishis went into these meditative states and found what sounds create what vibrations in the body. And whole Sanskrit is actually designed for creating right energies. It's actually impacting the inner layers of these panchakoshas. Language is a byproduct for communication. So amazing. One more thing from a modern perspective, there is something called cymatics in physics now. It's basically a visualization of sound through an instrument. This is a diaphragm on which fine particles are put, and then when you make various sounds, the particles arrange themselves into different patterns. And only for the sound Om, these particles arrange in a oval or spherical or circular pattern. For all other sound, they arrange in different patterns. In fact, if you make rock music, they create very complex structures. So Om is a very primordial sound because this shape is fundamental construct in the universe, right from atomic level to cosmic level. So these are some connections to indicate that there is so much in this whole science. So I have quite a few things to cover. Let me just run through a few of them. So I won't go into more detail. Medicine, similarly, I talked about how allopathic versus our ancient system. For example, Ayurveda looks at entire system as integrated, interconnected system. It's a holistic thing. Homeopathy is also very holistic. In fact, homeopathy works at a pranamaya kosha level. If you look at how the homeopathic medicine is made, it actually not even a single molecule of the original substance will be there in homeopathic medicine, but it transfers its atomic vibrations and it creates resonance in the pranamaya kosha, which actually then creates the rest of the physiology. That's why it works inside out. There is so much focus on food in the ancient, because food is what makes this entire panchakoshas. It is so important. Food, water, air, essentially. In ancient system, the focus was in classification of food in terms of energy, positive pranic food, negative pranic food, neutral pranic food, like that, because it was about impacting the, again, subtle, rather than just looking at proteins, carbohydrates. They're important, but this is even more important. There is a lot of focus on lifestyle. For example, aligning with sunrise and sunset is actually so important, which impacts our pineal gland, which is actually related to our third eye, the higher consciousness. So I have given these slides, but in the lack of time, I'm just run through that. You can take a look at that offline. Now, are you all okay to stretch for another maybe 10 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. No
Okay.
issues.
So fine, Vishnu. Sure.
Okay. So this is kind of a quick peek into our phenomenal vehicle or a boat or whatever you can call, or even a gadget, because through this actually you perceive the world also. So I thought we can do one small activity now, which can be a good practice for you to take away. This is one small pranayam. This is called uneven breathing, through which we can actually almost instantly breathe away our negative emotions or anxieties, fear, those kind of things. Again, there is neuroscience here. How it works is different ratios of inhale and exhale, basically. And now it's known that inhale is connected to sympathetic nervous system in our autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system is essentially which is responsible for things that are happening on their own, heartbeat, digestion, so much is happening inside us, right? It is all managed by this autonomic nervous system. And it has two parts. One is sympathetic nervous system, which creates excitement. That means it increases its activity, fight or flight. Whereas parasympathetic part is connected to the same organs, but its role is to what's called rest and digest. That means it relaxes. So it's like a two levers you push and pull based on the need. For example, if there is a threat and you have to very quickly act upon, sympathetic nervous system drives, then you activate a lot of things. If you want to relax, calm down, parasympathetic nervous system. So now with this breath, you can actually control them. It's like a steering wheel. So if you inhale shorter and exhale longer, you will reduce this fight or flight and become more relaxed. That's how it works. And there is one small technique that you need to learn for exhaling. In fact, even inhaling in certain pranayamas, but here for exhaling, you will need that. For exhaling, if you have to leave the breath slowly, you need a valve, right? Otherwise, it just comes out. So there is a valve in the throat. And if you do, just try that. If you say, and you feel a pressure in the throat. And now you do the same thing with mouth closed, but exhaling through nose. That means you still use the pressure in the throat. Just a minute. So now you can try. You just almost you count just 2 counts inhale, a very small hold, which is here to your comfort. Then say 4 counts of exhale, and then a small hold. Again, inhale 2 count, exhale 4 count, like that. Just relax your body. Sit relaxed and straight. Shoulder and neck, just relax. Just try that. Inhale, then exhale slowly. You can make a small sound through that throat. In fact, it's so powerful. You can actually regulate your BP, heart rate, stress, anxiety almost instantaneously. For example, if you are getting into a difficult conversation or going to a presentation or going to a customer call, something like that, you are having a little bit anxiety, just do 1 minute, this breathing, or just 2 minutes. You will feel so much relaxed. In fact, you can do that experiment. You count your pulse, for a minute, and then do this again. Count your pulse. You will see that heart rate actually comes down. So it's that instantaneous. So of course, if people have low BP, don't do this. In fact, they can do the other way. Shorter exhale, longer inhale. But most people have, higher BP, higher heart rate. So it's a very useful technique. And you can actually deal with all negative emotions through this, not just anxiety. Only thing is you should recognize that I'm getting into that zone. So let me just do this. So this is an experiment for you to do. Okay. Okay, so we have now learned, what this our phenomenal vehicle is. Now, how to fire that? We saw the techniques, but this jnana, bhakti, kriya, karma, where do they fit in? Very quickly, I cover that. Karma is essentially about selfless service, karma yoga. So selfless service in Indian system is defined in 4 levels. It's like annadana, donate food or money help people to live for a few more days. More useful or more impactful than that is Jivadana, like doctors, nurses, help people on health, well-being. Even more impactful is Vidyadana, like a teacher, help people to stand on their own feet. Even more impactful is Jnanadana, like Guru, help people realize who they are and what life is. And for lifetimes, they can help them. And that is how this is structured. And you can equate it to Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the modern psychology. So different people will have different needs. Some people will be, Swami Vivekananda said, for example, teaching meditation or yoga or Upanishads to a hungry person is actually a cruelty. They are not in that state. Their very fundamental need is, I need a food to survive right now. So it's a very physiological need. Like that's the shelter need. So there are various needs. And our service can align with any of such things based on the need of the receiver and based on where we want to contribute. And we can have combinations. If you look at most of these ashramas, they actually address all these things. They have daily free food, they have hospitals or Ayurveda clinics and yoga, etc. They have education centers, including pathshalas, Jnanadana, which is their primary satsangs and all this kriya and everything. So it's like seeing God in everything and serving, transcend the doership, the ahankara in the, you can say, Manonmaya Kosha or the Vijnanamaya Kosha. So that's about Karma Yoga. Bhakti Yoga, it's about Ishta Devata and worshipping and devotion, bhajans, upasana, puja. But the whole aspect in Bhakti is about surrendering. It's a quality of transformation. So the object of Bhakti is not the most important thing. The qualitative change that happens because of the emotion or the devotion within is actually the most important part. That's why in India, we see people worshipping trees, mountains, rivers, stones. Everything is okay because we see God in everything and transformation is more important. So that's Bhakti. Narada Bhakti Sutra is one of the most ancient, and Narada defines about 11 types of bhaktis. So there are a lot on that as well. Jnana is about self-inquiry. Who am I really? And it's shifting from the object of experience to looking at who is experiencing that. In fact, some of the very modern scientists like Bohr or Heisenberg or even Einstein, they actually started going inward like that. In fact, the uncertainty principle talks about the measuring entity itself impacts the measurement. That means what is seen gets impacted by who is seeing. So the who is seeing is more important than, and in the next Sunday we'll dwell more upon that, because that's how our pancha indriyas or the 5 sensory systems are projecting such a false picture of the existence. So it shifts that from a seen to the seer, object to the subject. This is the most direct path for actually enlightenment, but it's a difficult path. And all these modern Isha Yoga or Art of Living or Sri M, they combine all this. They fire all the engines. That's how they combine this sadhana, seva, satsang. Sadhana is kriya engine predominantly, seva is karma engine, satsang is through bhakti and jnana engines. And by doing these practices, they purify the body-mind complex, the whole panchakoshas, which greatly help in releasing the anchors and de-anchoring that we talked about in the last session. Just by psychologically trying to do that has certain limitations. What we saw in the last time, releasing the anchors, the deep-rooted impressions. In fact, we carry many of those impressions from multiple generations, actually. We are not aware of that. Again, next session, we see how the birth happens. So if you have to release some of them, Just by doing those is not good enough. By purifying these whole channels, which have those impressions, every thought and action actually creates impression in all the panchakoshas. So releasing that greatly helps through these kind of mechanisms. So goal of all this ultimately is to transcend the body mind complex and realize that we are one consciousness. That's where the yoga actually ultimate goal is. Physical health improvement, mental calmness, peace, all are just byproduct on the way. So fire the engines, propel the boat. A quick few tips for the daily practice. Sleep is a very important thing. Early to bed, early to rise has a great impact in aligning with nature cycles and the pineal gland. Food, vegetarian positive pranic food has again great impact on the whole subtle parts of this system. Sadhana, very good to do during Sandhya Kala, typically morning, noon and evening, but at least morning or at least morning and evening is good. This sequence is good. Asana, some chanting, pranayama with mudra. If you have learned some kriya, then meditation. So basically goes from gross to subtle. Seva, any seva service, selfless you can do to people. Then throughout the day, as frequently as possible, occasionally, breath watch that we did last time, which actually helps us to de-anchoring. And constant reminder, I'm not the boat, I'm the captain of the boat. I'm the witness of this body mind. Because this will lead to our higher consciousness. So this could be some ways of using this phenomenal vehicle. So we covered these two parts. Next session, we'll look at this adjusting the sails and rudders. This is a very subtle thing. I hope I'll be able to express it in an easy way, and things will happen during this week for me to access that, hopefully. So with that, I'll stop. Let me stop sharing.